Buzz here with Main Home Roasters. Today we're going to go ahead and we're going to be roasting some coffee in a skillet. We've already got it preheated. We have our stirring utensil. We recommend a wire whisk or silicone whisk because we find that it just does a better job of agitating the beans. And with a wooden spoon, at least I have a tendency to end up with beans popping out of my pan all the time, which is kind of annoying. We have 3/4 of a cup or 125 grams of green unroasted coffee. We have a timer device so we can go ahead and keep track of it in our journal. And we also have this nice metal mesh colander that we'll use to cool the beans down. And so without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and grab those beans. We're going to hit start, and we're immediately going to go ahead and start stirring. And it's really important to go ahead and agitate your beans. You need to keep them stirring the entire time to get as even a roast as possible. If you just let them sit and just stir them occasionally, you're going to get a very uneven roast, and some of the beans are going to burn on one side and still be almost raw on the other. So it's really important to make sure that you keep the beans moving at all times. We find that most of our roasts, if we're using a skillet, run somewhere in the 12.5 to 14 minute range, and of course it's going to depend on, you know, your skillet size and atmospheric conditions. Today's pretty interesting. It's springtime, but of course we live in northern Maine, so it is snowing out. Still, the air inside the house is fairly dry, and we've got it on medium or just a little over medium. Your stove may be different. You know, don't be afraid to experiment. That's one of the joys of roasting at home, is you get to go ahead and try different things out. Try different beans, different bean sizes, different origins, different methods of roasting. So we're going to go ahead and step away for just a second while these continue to roast, and we'll go ahead and bring you back in a minute. Alright, so about the 4.5 minute mark, we just heard our first bean go ahead and crack. Now, if you're not familiar with what's going on here, as the beans heat up, moisture is pushed out, and eventually they reach an internal temperature somewhere between 480 and 530 degrees Fahrenheit, around thereabouts, and they cause the bean to go ahead and crack open and expel moisture more rapidly, and we call that first crack. Now, first crack, once you have a full first crack, and we've only heard a couple so far, the coffee is considered roasted. It's a blonde roast or a light roast. It's going to be a fairly thin cup of coffee. It's not going to be full-bodied. It is, however, going to be fully caffeinated. Caffeine binds to water, and as you roast, you know, that water is expelled, and it takes caffeine with it. The darker you roast, the less caffeine you have, but the more flavor you have. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of people think, oh, it's darker, it tastes more full, it must have more caffeine in it, and actually it's the exact opposite. You can really hear the crack starting now. You'll see there's a lot of chaff, not to mention quite a bit of smoke coming off. You want to make sure that you have your vent hood on, or some kind of exhaust fan. If you have your smoke detectors on, you may want to disable them, depending on how close they are to your stove and how well your venting exhaust apparatus works, because it could go ahead and cause it to go off. Now you'll see the beans are quite a bit darker. You'll also notice that they're of varying shades of doneness. With this method of roasting, that is going to be a thing. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. The better you agitate the beans, the less difference there will be. The first couple times we tried this, we tried it with a spatula, we tried it with a wooden spoon, and the disparity between beans was quite alarming. We found that using a wire whisk like this, and, you know, obviously if we had one that was, you know, coated in something else that would be a little bit nicer to our cast iron pan, we'd have used it, but we find that it does a better job of keeping the beans agitated and giving us as even a roast as possible with this skillet roasting. You can hear those beans cracking quite a bit. We're at the 7 minute mark, and again, normally we end up somewhere around the 12 minute to 14 minute range, depending on the level of roast you want. Now we tend to go with a nice medium roast. Sometimes we'll roast it even right up to the edge of second crack and starting to get, you know, right on the edge of those dark, the lighter versions of the dark roasts. You know, just creeping into that territory, but that's because that's where we like it. If you like a French roast, you're going to want to probably go another minute or two. Once you hit first crack, though, things really start to move along, even though it may not look like it, but they really do. And, you know, this is the point where you really need to be paying attention. Don't slack off, don't stop stirring. You know, you want to keep things going. You want to have your colander ready when the time comes to take this off, because we're doing it in the skillet. And because we're going to be taking care of the chaff outdoors, we need to pull it off actually a little ways before our desired roast level. And the reason is those beans are going to continue to roast until we can get the temperature down. Okay, now fortunately for us, we live in northern Maine, and it is early spring, which means, of course, it is snowing outside. So plenty cold enough to get the job done, that's for sure. We're at the 8.5 minute mark, and things are moving quite along. This may be our quickest roast. You know, if you find that things are moving too quickly or not quickly enough, don't be afraid again to adjust your temperature. You know, just keep an eye on it. You know where it is that you want to go, or have a, you know, at least a general idea, and adjust your heat and your timing accordingly. At this point, we're starting to see some beans that have a little bit of oil coming to the surface, and so I think we're getting to the point. This is 9 minutes. Second crack is starting in here. It kind of sounds like cellophane. So I think we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull it now. And we're going to go ahead and take these outside. Alright, so like we said, you can see there's still a lot of smoke coming off this, and you can see all the chaff. And this is why we don't use our air popper indoors. So in the wintertime, we will roast outside in the winter. We just put our roaster inside a box to get a temperature up. It does take longer, but this is why you don't do this indoors. Because you have all this chaff coming off. The idea now, no matter when you're roasting, what time of year, the idea is to cool the beans down as quickly as possible. Now, we're doing it in here because this agitates it extra, and you can get more of the chaff off, which is, of course, what you want to do. Now, there are some people that they go ahead and they handle this process a little bit differently. They'll go ahead and either dechaff it by hand, or they'll spread it out thinly on a cookie sheet first and let the beans completely cool before they try this. If you do that, just know it's going to take a lot longer for your beans to cool down, and so they're going to continue to roast. So you need to take that into account and take your beans off the heat sooner, knowing that they're not going to stop roasting nearly as quickly. But we find that this is about the best way. Plus, when you're shaking it up like that, as the beans bang together, obviously they take off any additional chaff that might be on there. But when you're done, and that's what you're left with. It's a pretty nice medium roast. You see there is quite a bit of difference in some of these. That one there, you want to get rid of. Those are going to be very bitter. Some of the beans do not roast all the way. But, and there's the snow on top of it. Awesome. But that's it, guys. Next roasting on